But here we have a panel of experts who do not make strategic errors. They give us a first-hand account of the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan's creation and the lessons it has taught us over the past 25 years. Please welcome with me Porter Goss, former U.S. Representative for Florida's 14th Congressional District and former Director of the CIA, Chairman Talbert Cypress, Chairman of the Miccosukee General Council, Ryan Seeger, Staff Director and Senior Counsel of the U.S. House Transportation and Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment, and Shannon Estenos, former U.S. Department of the Interior Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks, who will be facilitating this conversation.
Great.
Have at it, guys.
So much. Well, good afternoon. Mic's working. First of all, I just want to thank the Everglades Foundation. What a wonderful video. I hadn't seen it before this afternoon, and just to see and hear the voices of some of those folks who were mentors to so many of us is very touching. And I'm really honored that and thankful that you, Congressman, were a part of that video. So the idea here is for us to have a conversation. So I'm less moderator and more facilitator. And what we're hoping to come out of this is, I don't know, one or two war stories and personal reflections, also some lessons learned about what it took to move the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan to authorization, and then what it's taken to get us where we are today. But where I'd like to start is actually a little bit closer to the beginning, not quite the beginning, but a little bit closer, and direct a question to you, Mr. Chairman, about I want to take you back to the same time period that Paul Tudor Jones took us back to, the late 1980s, when government wasn't necessarily on board in the way it needed to be in protecting the Everglades, and the role that the Miccosukee Tribe played in bringing government to the table through the courts and through strong advocacy. Could you reflect a little bit on the tribe's leadership role in those earliest days as a voice for the Everglades?
Yeah, I can start back even further. The tribe has lived a subsistence lifestyle in the Everglades for centuries, and during the Seminole Wars, the Everglades was a safe haven for my people. And so we do have a constitutional and a cultural responsibility to protect the Everglades. And I take that job very seriously as a leader for my people. And we were tasked, my predecessors, which I am proud to follow in their footsteps. I'm the 5th chairman for the tribe, and all these chairmen have worked in the past to emphasize Everglades restoration. And in the 1980s and 90s and into the 2000s, with the authorization of CERP, the tribe was there organizing stakeholders to really emphasize the need for this project to be completed. And we're still working at it. And you know, the tribe has spent decades fighting the state and federal government to establish water quality standards in the Everglades. And so, you know, we're proud to be a voice that organizes people together, brings people together, and really show them the importance of the Everglades, not just to us, but to everybody in Florida. And so, you know, for my people, we have lived harmoniously with the land for many years, and we traveled east and west through its natural waterways and trails, and, you know, the tribe envisions going back to that and bringing a natural flow to the Everglades. And so, you know, that's why I believe that, you know, my predecessors really emphasized Everglades restoration. And, you know, we're proud to say that we are a voice that champions that.
Thank you. And you know, the tribe's work and the work of others in the late 1980s really began a decade-long process of developing an approach. How do we, first of all, how big is the problem, right? We started with water quality, but then some really smart people figured out, oh my gosh, it's actually much bigger than that. It's a whole plumbing problem. The entire region is plumbed in the wrong way. And then we spent a decade kind of developing an approach to fixing that, which culminated in 1999 and 2000. You were there, you were there, I was there, I was chairing the Everglades Coalition at the time, let's talk a little bit about how we went from those fraught days of fighting in the late 1980s and anger to a moment of tremendous solidarity to pass really a piece of landmark legislation to restore the Everglades. Congressman?
Well, from my perspective on it, we were about 50 years late on getting to CERP, even though it's the 25th anniversary, because I believe it was a lady named Marjorie Stoneman Douglas who pointed out about mid-century, the last century, that we got a problem on our hands. And what was causing the problem was that South Florida had been discovered, growth was coming, and the question was, would the wonderful natural resources of Southwest Florida be able to make it through the evolution, the change that was coming, and change we knew was coming. So fast forward 50 years later, and you think, yes, we had a moment of peace and harmony, and it was a very lovely moment of peace and harmony to be a member of the Florida delegation, which was frankly much smaller then because Florida did not have as many people. So the district I represent has now changed numbers 3 times, I think. The growth is so fantastic in Florida. Just the 50 or 60 years we've been there, I've seen 4 airports, international airports, come and go in Southwest Florida, which gives you an idea of what's happening to us. And the threat continues because the 5th airport will come soon, I'm sure. The moment of harmony that you spoke of, when all the Florida delegation, and it was a strong delegation. We had some great leadership at a lot of chairmanship levels because we'd had a lot of longtime members from Florida. We had some very energetic members from the House, and I know that I always look to Bob Graham as my mentor on this because Bob came and got me out of my comfort zone in Sanibel, dragged me out into the Everglades to meet some of your predecessors, and I, for the first time, discovered that, yes, this is a beautiful thing, and then a few years later, I discovered, yes, there is some threat to it, and I think we all got together and understood the threat. The most interesting thing that I can think about for 25 years ago, as we started, this wonderful moment of harmony came into one of the most contested presidential elections of all times, when some of you will remember the hanging Chad. And the hanging Chad, actually, by the time it all got resolved, had created some unhappiness, to put it mildly. And the part of the result was I noticed that the Bush 43 cabinet was having a hard time getting formed, getting going, as we all did. And I wondered, what happens to legislation that's in a vacuum, that's just sitting out there? And I think Brian can tell us, usually it just disappears. Right. So we went through a very, very, very precious birthing moment. And thank God the Florida delegation rallied around again and said, we're not dropping the ball on this. We're going to take care of this. So
Amen.
That's my #1 memory.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Ryan, you were 12,
yeah.
And working on the Hill, right? Something like that. Like I was.
Exactly.
I was 11.
12,
yeah.
So it's kind of funny as a congressional staffer who is used to neither being seen nor heard, the opportunity to sit on a panel like this and kind of talk about executing Chairman Goss's vision in terms of the Everglades is kind of a unique situation. I think you have to understand in terms of the context. We've been the product of our own successes of recent in terms of where it is now expected every 2 years. Mm-hmm. The idea that the Corps of Engineers is going to be actively involved in these large-scale ecosystem restoration projects has become kind of the norm. But back in 2000, that was not the case. Right. We had definitely gone through some cycles where WRDA was not as predictable as it is now. Maybe not like as it was a little bit later on in kind of the history. But the idea of the Corps of Engineers putting its arms around so comprehensive a project was not something that we had had any history in. And so I think, to the extent that we were engaged in Everglades restoration activities in the late 90s, they were very much kind of fits and starts. It wasn't a comprehensive program. So when the delegation approached the Congress about creating something different, something that is multifaceted in terms of multiple projects that interact with one another, that rely on one another to kind of execute this larger vision, that was a breaking ground in terms of water resources development acts that we had not done before. It has become the model. I think there are a lot of other areas of the country that are definitely learning from the successes of the kind of the Florida Everglades and the idea of bipartisanship and longevity, and as I think Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz said, that kind of that dogged resilience to kind of making sure, regardless of who's in charge, keeping your eye on kind of the end game and the funding and kind of overcoming all the challenges that come. But in 2000, this was visionary in terms of kind of something new, something different. And the fact that we're now 25 years later and starting to see the product of that success is only just testament to what Chairman Goss and the rest of the delegation saw, and that Congress is able to, fortunately, to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, it's incredible. And just because his name was invoked, I'll just take 30 seconds to sort of fill in the gaps. You know, Governor Graham, in 1983, I think it was, really initiated the with his Save Our Everglades program. And then there was a series of moments between 1983 and 2000. And 2000, for a lot of us, felt at the time like the culmination of those 16 years. And in the middle of it, you know, the tribe's leadership and really getting us focused where we needed to be. I don't think any of us fully comprehended that it was also the beginning of something even bigger. I mean, it felt like the end of something huge. And we later found out it was the beginning of something ginormous. That's not even that's not even a word, but I guess it is. And so I want to go there next, which is, all right, bill signed into law in this historic kind of crazy moment. You know, this is the sort of island of unity in a sea of political turmoil in our country. And so we're off to the races, right? Not so much. The first decade of restoration was really hard. It was really hard. I'm looking out there for the older timers to nod and give me, did you guys block it all out, or do you remember it? It was really hard. And I'm thinking of, I want us to reflect on that first decade, because both in the Congress, we had stuff happening in Tallahassee with the Everglades Forever Act. Mother Nature was dishing out her worst. Let's talk about that first decade, because here's my question. For a lot of reasons, we probably should have failed in that first decade. We probably should have, but we didn't. And that's what I want to talk about, is why didn't we? So let's first talk about what we were facing, and then let's talk about why it didn't undo us. Who wants to go first? You want to talk about WERDA?
Sure.
Earmarks?
So obviously, as I mentioned, kind of there were definitely times when WERDA was not as predictable. I think 2000 was a milestone, and then we went through 7 years in the desert until WERDA 2007 for lots of different reasons. I think core reform was probably the issue at the time. Right. And then between 2007 and 2014, we went through another 7 years in the desert, because at that time, I think then earmarks became something that was not as favored in Congress. And so we walked away from doing Corps of Engineers bills, because in essence they are a litany of project-specific authorizations and studies. And so from a predictability standpoint of being able to execute that second generation, that third generation of Everglades projects that were kind of in the queue and waiting, we had to wait until there was kind of this consensus in Congress that a large project-based bill was something we could do again. To some extent, we had to cede some authority to our appropriators, which, for those who know the difference between authorized and appropriators, we tend to never do that. But that was kind of the only way of getting things done. And then you mentioned in terms of kind of Mother Nature. I mean, remember in that period, we also had some significant extreme weather events, both in South Florida, the Hurricane Katrina kind of changing the whole dynamic in terms of what is considered to be a robust core project and what level of risk are you willing to take. Those things put the Corps on its back foot for a few years in terms of their ability to kind of push the envelope of restoration activities, as well as what risk our community is willing to accept in terms of existing projects and kind of their longevity. So you're absolutely right. There were a lot of curveballs that were thrown in that time period that definitely made this consistent process of making sure Congress stays on top, both from an authorizing standpoint and from an appropriation standpoint, more challenging.
Yeah. Congressman, Mr. Chairman, anything to add?
Yeah, I think with the authorization of CERP, it was an acknowledgement of the mismanagement of the Everglades over the past couple centuries. And so the reason it didn't fail was because I think, we did an important job of learning from our mistakes. And so part of learning from our mistakes is figuring out what to prioritize, which projects need the most work, and the tribe coming to the table and really bringing people together. And this year, we got Western Everglades Restoration authorized, and that's a keystone project for the Everglades Restoration. And as you stated, with CERP, we realized this is a much bigger project, and as long as we keep working and keep moving towards the goal of restoration of all the Everglades, I think, we learn from mistakes and, we grow, and, as long as we work together, we'll still keep going forward.
Congressman.
I think that the big threat, I think we've always recognized that to have any success in the Everglades with a project of this magnitude, and given the way our government is set up, the representational form of government, is that we had to sell the national brand, and that was a very big part of that. But first we had to look to the stakeholders who are involved in South Florida, in the actual Everglades and the Everglades writ large around, the people who are affected, impacted, jobs, the economy, the whole question, the culture, the living. And I think that we did not fully understand that we needed a critical, strong quarterback all day, every day, 7 days a week, to keep the pressure on the funders, to keep the pressure on the voters, to make sure that the mischief on the edges was kept under control. And there was some mischief on the edges, and there's no doubting it, because even though there was a lot of apparent support, some of it was a little weak, shall we say, and trying to be very polite. I will say I know of nobody who outright tried to sabotage what we were doing, but I had some suspicions, if I could put it that way. And I think that understanding, finally, of how to deal with the stakeholders and get everybody to the table and make them feel a little comfortable. Nobody's going to get everything and nobody's going to get nothing. That was a critical factor, which I think has grown through the years and now is something that helps us guarantee some success to get this down the line. But the other things you speak of, the existential happenings, climate change, hurricanes, that kind of stuff, interesting things that you can't predict. And what you have to be able to do is take advantage of those things when they happen. And shamelessly, I'll say, even though the folks in Louisiana might not appreciate this, Katrina did us a favor with the Corps of Engineers, because we now are able to hold a little more water, which allows us to keep a little less polluted water going forward. I think the other great reason that we succeeded, two reasons probably, is the simplicity of the task. It was clear. We are trying to restore a wonderful natural resource, and we can all see it falling apart in front of us. That's pretty easy. That's restoration. And the other was the way you do that is get the water flowing south.
Right.
Okay, this is a fairly simple message. And I think everybody gets it. And the idea that this is a national treasure, there is a solution. All we have to do is do it. And the fact, to me, that is the most compelling is that the purity of the mission is truth. It's real. We're not selling anything that isn't absolutely true. It's a wonderful national resource that deserves our protection. I don't think I ever liked the C in CERP, because it stood for continuation of protection, and protection, yes, but not restoration. Restoration has to end, and we have to go forward. So I call it the Comprehensive Protection and Continuous Restoration Program when it goes wrong.
That's great. That's a much longer acronym.
It's very hard.
Yeah,
but it reminds me.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And I think the piece that I'll add about that decade, the other thing that was happening was, we had these giant agencies that were tasked with, frankly, a new mission. The mission of restoration did not line up perfectly with the agencies who were asked to do the work. It was not exactly what definitely wasn't what the Corps was used to doing, wasn't exactly what the wasn't what the Water Management District was established to do. And it wasn't even really what Interior was in the business of doing. And so for a long time, those agencies there would either be big gaps of jurisdiction, like that's not our problem, that's not our problem, that's not our problem, or there would be this tangled knot of overlapping jurisdiction. We're getting in each other's way and getting in ourselves' way. Water Management District had to write brand new rules. I mean, there were just rules about how to use water that didn't exist before. So that first 10 years, oh, and then the other thing I'll say about Katrina is remember what happened with, I mean, we all remember what happened with Katrina, but how did it affect us, just to fill gaps in for those for whom this might be a gap? I mean, ultimately what happened was when the dike around Pontchartrain failed, then concerns about the dike, the Herbert Hoover dike, developed, and the Corps' response operationally was to drop the lake, and we ended up with a much lower lake, which put a tremendous amount of pressure onto the estuaries because we couldn't flow that water south. We didn't have the infrastructure yet. And then in 2008, in addition to a financial meltdown, we suffered the worst drought, just as I was taking my seat on the governing board of the Water Management District. I know there are governing board members out there. Droughts are miserable. It was the worst drought in recorded history, and the lake fell to 8.5 feet. So we had 8.5 feet of water in the summer, in the middle of the summer. So all of that sort of difficulty hit us in that first decade of implementation. And yet, what we're hearing here is what we heard this morning, and I love what you said, Congressman, about, and this is, I think, a hallmark of the Everglades. Every day of the week, hundreds of people wake up in the morning and think about this ecosystem. Every single day, all of you, and most of you are among these folks who get up every single day and think about Everglades restoration. And that has been true, not for 10 years, not for 15 years, but for 25 years, really. Whether you're an engineer at the Corps of Engineers, or you're a person who works for an environmental group, or you're a member of the tribe who's concerned about your cultural and heritage and your history. So let's talk a little bit about, we're past 2014. Let's get past 2014, for goodness sake, to where things start looking up. And word is start moving, and we get Central Everglades, and we start working on WERP, in 2014. And we heard some of it this morning, how the Everglades Army just started to grow. And I want to go back again to this muscle memory we started building about how to do this. Let's reflect on the last, say, 15 years, or wait, no, that's 10 years, 11 years. And just how good we've gotten at this, and why it is that we are getting record levels of federal funding in our 25th year. It's incredible. Anybody?
I will tell you, I don't remember the year the dechannelization of the Kissimmee started, but I didn't really have the confidence that we were ever going to get this done until I saw what happened. And I will never forget Bob Graham following me in. I went in the first helicopter to the people who lived on the banks of the Kissimmee when it was channelized. And I remember I went in and I had a crowd of people with pitchforks and very unhappy smiles on their face about, we ain't leaving. Bob Graham came in the next helicopter, did what Bob Graham always does, got out his notebook and said, so what is your name? Where do you live? Now, this is my telephone number. Now, what can I do for you? And by the time we left there, Bob Graham and Lawton Childs, God bless him, the governor again, had said, folks, this is going to work out well because you're going to have a great place to live. We're going to get the Everglades, and the lake's going to be great again. And they believed it, and they left, and it happened. And we got the Kissimmee back the way it should have been, the way Mother Nature intended it to be. It's doing its job. Those people are by and large happy as far as I know. At least I haven't been sued yet. And it has been, to me, convincing that, okay, people understand this, they get it, and they are willing to sacrifice a little. If we get all the stakeholders to understand that a little sacrifice gets this job done, we have done it perfectly.
Anybody else?
So, it's great that you bring up droughts, right? My people have a cultural, traditional, and historical knowledge of the Everglades. And for us, droughts were something we saw often. And we would learn how to navigate during droughts and move to different tree islands as we would do regular burns and we would farm. And so we understood how the Everglades operated. And it's important for myself to hear these stories from my elders and my predecessors about how the Everglades used to be, and to share that knowledge with people like you in the room. And it's very fulfilling to see everybody coming together from different backgrounds and listening to what the tribe's voice is. And you bring up Bob Graham, and late Chairman Billy Cypress used to tell me many stories about Bob Graham visiting and Lawton Childs visiting, and their leadership in Everglades restoration. And it's my job to pass on that knowledge to our younger people now, so that they don't forget what this job really is about, and it's about protecting our homelands. And so over the past 10 years, it's been really wonderful to see the progress that we've made. And but we don't stop here. We keep going and we keep working, and whoever comes after me has to keep that torch going as well.
Ryan, anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I've had the pleasure of working for 4 chairmen and ranking members in my time here in Congress, and not one of them has been from the state of Florida. But so obviously from where my paycheck salary comes from is that's not their parochial interest. But in terms of developing water resources bills, and I think Chairman Goss said it well, is the delegation always spoke with one voice. And in WRDA world, that always doesn't happen. You oftentimes have competing interests. You have members within the same state who are obviously advocating for different issues in different ways in the same bill, and that always creates a little bit of drama and conflict. The Everglades has been quite the opposite in terms of it doesn't matter if the Democrats are in control of Congress or the Republicans are in control of Congress. The ask is the same. And so that consistency and that kind of that dogged resilient nature of the ask makes our job tremendously easier in terms of it is with one voice that the ask for the Everglades comes. I will tell you that from a staff perspective, it makes our job tremendously easier when you don't have to kind of solve the problems amongst the delegation for them. It just comes to you as one big ask, which is a great way to do it. I also think, though, to kind of looking forward, the success is probably also some of the challenges, right? Because we talked about the idea that the Everglades is probably the first and one of the largest comprehensive restoration programs in the Corps of Engineers portfolio, but it is by no means the only one. And if you've seen in recent years, there have definitely been questions asked about top-line budgets of where the Corps money is going in terms of which states get the largest share of Corps funding. And obviously, because of the size and scope and the kind of longevity of the Everglades project, Florida is obviously a big winner in that. But there are a lot of other members who look around that and have, for lack of a better word, Everglades envy in terms of kind of those resources and kind of that attention. So I think the successes also forebode some of the challenges that are going to come forward in terms of you're finally seeing the progress in terms of the restoration work actually achieving on-the-ground benefits. The longevity of kind of, as Chairman Goss said, in terms of the ribbon cutting for the kind of the release in the water is quite a few years, hopefully not quite a few years, but a few years ahead. But I think that is also, again, one of the challenges, because that commitment to funding, that commitment to attention will be needed for a while a lot of other members in a lot of other regions kind of say, when is it our turn to kind of be at the top end of the food chain?
Well, look, and I think that's an absolutely fair, and realistic, I think, debate. I think the good news for us in the Everglades is because we have traveled this long and winding road, because we have this we know what we're doing. Like, we know what we're doing now. We know solve your problems in Florida. The late great Clay Shaw, I remember, I sat in his office in 1999, 2000. And I was 29 or 28 years old. And, the advice he told me was on the bill. He said, solve all your problems in the Senate. Don't bring your problems to the House because your adversaries have more influence, and can maybe move things around a little bit. It's harder in the House. And we, that was a lesson learned, right? Like where your best forums are. And I think one of the big take-home messages for all of us who will leave here and continue to work on the Everglades is when we have conflict, when we have problems, when we're working through WERP, right? We've got stakeholders who are concerned. We know, let's solve those in Florida. Don't come to Washington with a divided voice for the reason, Ryan, that you just stated. I also wanted to just share a quick anecdote, Bob Graham anecdote, which is that he told me that his father wrote, who was, of course, a farmer, a dairyman, north of Tamiami Trail, before Tamiami Trail was built. And his father, and he actually showed me an image of the op-ed, wrote an op-ed to the Miami Herald opposing the construction of Tamiami Trail. He said it's going to dam up water and it's going to ruin the flow of water into Everglades National Park. And I just love that. That we had voices even back in the day who knew that this was going in the wrong direction. Did you want to add something?
Hurt that Bob's family had some influence with a certain Washington paper that had some influence with certain Washington elected officials.
Probably true. So I do want to save a couple of minutes. We're open to audience questions. I have an iPad. I'm told that if you submit them, they will show up on this iPad. But it doesn't look like it did when they showed me how to use it. So, okay. So going back to let's look ahead. To your point, Ryan, and to the points that were made this morning, we have work to do. We cannot let our foot off the gas because we can't create any kind of vacuum that other programs or projects might fill. And so, some of the sort of the economic arguments we heard this morning, the fact that we are a good investment. We want to be, and we refer to Congress and the legislature as our investors. We think of them as our investors. The American people and the citizens of Florida are our investors. How important is that messaging going forward? And is it central, sort of to the success in the next decade?
I would certainly say so. Debbie said so. Brian said so.
Yeah.
I mean, Washington works in strange ways. There's what you see and what you don't see. It's behind the curtain quite often. And I can tell you, the networking is critically important. Bob was good. Clay was good at it. People were able to negotiate their positions of authority to the benefit of the Everglades in a totally honorable way of saying, this is a worthy cause, and I can help you with your causes over here because I'm an important person in the process. And the other side of that is the negative side. It's great to have somebody on the defense who's guarding against the mischief that comes in through strange channels every now and then that tends to have words drop or added in lengthy bills that suddenly have great consequences. So you've got to have players all around. You've got to have a network, but you have to have the true belief in what you're doing, because everything else, elections come and go, legislation comes and goes. A lot of legislation I voted for, which passed, eventually got vetoed or canceled by the Supreme Court. That's just life. But what doesn't change, hopefully, is the Everglades.
Right.
That's the point. And it's a constant. That's a view people can see.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, messaging is very key, I think, for the tribe. Chairmen before me have worked to establish science departments within our tribe that we use to back up our message, our traditional knowledge and messages that we put out there about the Everglades. So definitely key.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'll underscore in terms of kind of the success that the kind of the coalition has had in terms of bringing Congress solutions as opposed to problems. I mean, you cannot underestimate how critical that is in terms of not having Congress be an arbiter of local fights against each other, in terms of coming to us with kind of, we all know that these projects take a long time to develop. We know that there's a lot of conversations and negotiations and stakeholder engagement that takes place well before we ever get involved. But the one thing that I can say consistently about the kind of all the Everglades projects is they come to us with an answer. They don't come to us with an array of options that we have to then pick and choose amongst winners and losers. And as the chairman knows, a lot of times you go towards where the easy is, in terms of you don't actually want to take on the hard, because those are things that can fall off in bills, because as you're kind of rushing towards closing the books on major legislation, the things that can't get solved to the end, they have a tendency to fall off. And so to the extent that you come to us with solutions, stakeholder engagement across the board, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat coming with the idea, it's got universal buy-in. You cannot undervalue how important that is to the ability of just maintaining that success.
All right, lesson learned. Lesson learned. That's one of our big ones. Speaking with one voice, singing like a choir when you come to DC. And I would say probably the same is true, I would think, for Tallahassee as well. So in our last few minutes, and I apologize to the audience, but I couldn't figure out how to do the technology. I apologize. One last thing that you would say to this audience, many of whom are Everglades soldiers and warriors, and they're out there every day, and they're all doing something different. They're either the ones developing the plans, or they're the ones standing up and saying really brave things to decision makers. What's your message to these folks? Drawing on your 25 plus years of, being involved in the Everglades.
I have to go back and think, how do we get where we are with some of the problems? And it took me a long time to put together the fact that Fidel Castro has caused me some problems in Southwest Florida, because he kicked a bunch of people out of Cuba that needed a place to work and live. And they came over and they worked and lived, but it wasn't in an organized necessarily way. That had a huge impact on what was going on in our agricultural areas in South Florida. So there are extraneous events that are going to happen. They're going to try and rock the boat. Things will happen. Wrenches will come in, as Debbie said. It's the way life is. So my advice is keep the faith and keep writing the checks.
Marvelous, marvelous, love it. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Castro. The tribe wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Fidel Castro recognizing the Miccosukee Tribe and forcing the U.S. government to recognize us. So, he made us your problem as well. but yes, my predecessors have had every right to be adversarial and non-compliant, but we've worked very hard to send a strong message about Everglades restoration and to team up with everybody else rather than be adversarial, and try to bring people together, because the population isn't going anywhere and we have to share Florida, and so we just want to be a voice that's heard, and we want to be first to the table, and that's the message we try to send.
That's wonderful. Right.
I guess the only thing I'll add, and it's a little bit of a flip the script in terms of it's a word of thank you. WERDAs are project-driven bills, which means that there has to be this kind of mass of critical, politically salient issues that kind of are in the queue waiting for Congress to kind of decide that it's time for us to do a regular water resources bill kind of on a regular basis. And again, going back to 2000, 2007, and kind of the 2014, where that critical mass really wasn't there. In those early years, so 14, 16, 18, when some of the big Everglades projects were kind of moving to the queue, to some extent, we were your vehicle to kind of get to authorization to the president's desk, but you were also some of the fuel that helped make sure that Congress was on regular order, in terms of there was a political reason, and not in a kind of anti-political, but in a pro-political way of getting this done, and the kind of the criticality of this has to be done before this Congress is over, or this won't go somewhere.
Right.
And that actually had some muscle behind it. And so I think those early years of kind of having these critical projects in the queue and ready to go helped us build that kind of, again, muscle memory of there is a reason for us to do a water resources bill every 2 years. And to some extent now, as we kind of benefit from the Everglades and then the other large-scale restoration projects and other projects just kind of have kind of cascaded after that, it's made it easier for us. And now I think, again, it doesn't matter who's the chairman of our committee, there's a commitment that everyone wants to make sure that on their watch, we don't drop the ball and make sure this isn't a 2-year cycle. So again,
Right.
it's a thank you of making sure these things help prime the pump to get this thing started.
So if WERDA is the car, we always want to be the gas that's in the car. That's it. That's the other lesson. Be the gas in the car. The only thing I'll add is to the younger people in the audience, or not even younger people, younger Everglades soldiers, so folks who have joined a little bit later in the game, I would say, don't wait. Don't wait for an assignment. Don't wait for somebody to ask you to pick up the ball and run with it. Like I said, I was 28 years old, and the first time I testified before Congress against the sugar subsidy program, in fact, when I was 28 years old. And there's room for every single person, and we absolutely need that next generation of voices and leaders to pick up the ball and run. And so welcome, if you are relatively new to the Everglades, welcome to Everglades Nation. We are happy to have you. And join me in thanking this incredible group of panelists. Wonderful. Well done. Well done. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay. All right. I think we're done.
Come to South Florida on your vacation.
Yes, please do.
Bring your congressman
come.
with you.